Matthew Penston reporting. I'm here today to interview Joel Harden, the provincial candidate for the NDP here in Ottawa Centre, and a man who wants to change the way we do politics in this province. And basically, three things I want to take away from this interview are how we can do away with cynicism in politics, what the party can do for young people specifically, and how we can win in 2018.
Matt, good. Good to see you too.
So Joel,
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for your time.
No problem.
And I would like to congratulate you on the nomination for Ottawa Centre.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Can you tell us, what have you learned during the nomination process that you can kind of take and apply towards the campaign?
Yeah, the nomination process has been a learning curve for me as a candidate. This is my first time being a candidate. I've been a community organizer for a very long time, so what I think I brought to the nomination ranks was helped me is people often think that organizing is about talking, but I actually believe organizing, really serious organizing, is about listening and figuring out what people are looking for in a political campaign, and in this case, in a candidate. So that was great, but I'll be honest, the level of the work was intense. I mean, we set a goal in the nomination race to talk to over 1,000 in person, 1,000 active NDP members in Ottawa Centre. There's over 2,500, signed up active members in the riding. So we tried to, carve out a reasonable set of work in that regard. And we wanted to raise the maximum. We wanted to raise $6,000. That's what the party had said is the maximum. We wanted to show ourselves and the electorate and the party that we're capable of raising the maximum. And we succeeded in 4.5 weeks. It was a 10-week nomination campaign, so we were thrilled with that. Since winning the nomination, we're doing the same thing. We said, okay, we want to raise more than the Liberals raised in the last provincial election in 2014. We want to raise $200,000 by next May. The election's in June 7th, 2018. So that for us meant raising $30,000 by the end of 2017. What I'm happy to tell you is, as of yesterday, we're nearing in on $25,000. We crossed $24,000 earlier this week. Yeah, and that's a lot of our, over 70 volunteers calling up their own friends and saying, hey, can you spare $20? Not an easy time of year to be asking this stuff for people.
Absolutely.
But what I'm really excited about is that folks are responding to the boldness of the ideas the party's putting forward this time. I think they also like the fact that they're dealing with a candidate who's actually looking at them and listening to them and asking them to get involved. I really believe we need less ego in politics.
Right.
I think we need more action. And I think we're sitting on a treasure trove of really skilled and compassionate and passionate people here in Ottawa Centre. We have to move out of the model of thinking that everything has to be done in saluting and celebrating the candidate. I actually think about it in the reverse. I think it's decentering the ego of the candidate, putting the emphasis back on the people who live here and what we can accomplish together. So that seems to be what people are responding to, what they're donating to, what they're volunteering with. So that's been great.
Right. And so it's going to be you versus Yasser Naqvi. How
and other candidates from other parties, but yes.
And other parties, yes, of course. How do we turn Ottawa Centre orange?
Yeah, well, I think it's really organizing at its core. I don't care where you're doing it, is about raising people's expectations. That's what it's about. And I think for too long, people have expected too little from politics. A lot of people are cynical about politics. I mean, you and I are political science majors, so we know this from the research. We know that, just over 55% of the electorate participated here in 2014. So that's nearly half of the electorate just opting out. And
Right.
I think that's coming from a place of saying, you know what, it really doesn't matter. And I'll even own the fact as an NDP candidate, we've had NDP governments in the province of Ontario, and they've disappointed people. So we're dealing with a very cynical context. So I think our goal to not just prevail against a Liberal incumbent who happens to be the Attorney General of the province, who I think has aspirations of being the Premier of this province. Our goal isn't to just prevail against the incumbent. I think our goal is to raise the expectations people have for politics. And the whole reason I got involved in this is because I actually, myself, I think it was time for me to enter this fray because I'm impatient with what we've been able to get doing the things that I've done all the time, like raising money for progressive causes, bringing people together for rallies and conferences, and really, really good organizing work. It hasn't been meeting my own expectations.
Right.
So I had good friends talk me into getting involved in this space because we're reaching a lot more people. And I think about an issue like climate change, and I'm looking at the science, and the science is telling me that for my kids' generation, if we don't start taking risks and reaching bigger audiences, we're not going to meet the targets we have to meet for them to have a livable future. So for me, it's not just about running against the incumbent, it's about asking people to be more bold and to raise the bar of our expectations and to demand more.
And you speak about that cynicism and that belief that, oh, well, all politicians are the same. Why do you think that mentality exists? And how can we sort of get people to see that no, politics, it can be different?
Well, I told you before that I think the core of good organizing is listening. The other thing that happens with good listening is honesty. And from a standpoint of honesty, again, I have to say, as an NDP candidate, the first government I protested when I was a student was an NDP government. I protested the Bob Rae NDP government over a 12% increase in tuition fees. I was deeply frustrated that the good people I liked were trying to explain to me why, in the name of austerity, I had to suck it up and pay another 12%. I was the first time university goer in my family. There were a lot of expectations on me. I felt like I was leveraged to the hilt, and the thought of that extra financial burden would keep me up at night. Mm-hmm. And, I was really angry, as were a lot of students. And so I think that's where the cynicism comes from. I don't think it's ill-informed. I think the electorate is a lot smarter than political scientists and experts give them credit.
Right.
I mean, I think the electorate is tired of the usual middle-of-the-road approach to politics where the candidate is some kind of plastic creature with their perfect family and their happy grin who shows up at everything. People are sick of that. I mean, I think people are ready for a real candidate with some boldness, who will make some mistakes maybe, who will be cheeky enough, who will be ambitious enough to want to push the needle a little bit. Not in a sanctimonious way, not in a speechifying way, but in a way that bends towards justice.
Right.
So I actually think the cynicism people feel about politics is absolutely warranted, but we have to take it back. We have to flip the script, and we have to demand more from our own party, from the Ontario NDP. We have to demand more from our own politics. And when people get a sense that that's happening, we'll see people flocking towards this. It's what we've seen in the United States with the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's what we've seen in England with Jeremy Corbyn's historic breakthrough. The Prime Minister in waiting, effectively a socialist. I have friends in Chile who are doing the same thing at a municipal level. Elsewhere in Europe, we see ideas that had been, marginalized.
Right.
Getting a center stage because people are realizing we got to be more ambitious if we want to deal with the problems we're facing.
And how do you convince the electorate that, these bold ideas, they're not radical, they're in a way like they'll make sense. If I'm a parent and my kid is going to university and they're facing tuition fees that are skyrocketing, what can the NDP do there? And what can they do that's different than what the Liberals would propose?
Yeah, so this is good because what we're doing now is being a little bit more tangible, moving beyond the bold ideas as a slogan, and let's be very clear about what I mean. So the party's position on post-secondary hasn't been clearly articulated yet in its platform. What I'm telling you is my last job was being a researcher for the Canadian Federation of Students, and I know from my own research and from talking to hundreds of students and families from across the country that people are ready for a completely different approach to post-secondary education.
Absolutely.
Because we have a student debt crisis. Now $28 billion in the country is owed in student debt, and it's killing people. I mean, people are fortunate to find a job after graduation, not to mention the fact that they deal with these crushing burdens month upon month. Like a third of the graduating class last year, individuals in the workforce were making less than $25,000. And we know this because they qualify for a special Canada Student Loan Program you only get access to if you make less than $25,000 a year. So People are dealing with these crushing burdens, and when we think about where universities and colleges came from in this country, they came from veterans. They came from veterans coming back from the Second World War who said, we've sacrificed, we've given, it's time for our families, not just the rich, to have access to the training we need to be successful, to build our communities, to feed our families. And we've moved so far away from that. We've gone back into this elitist model where, medical school, aircraft maintenance at colleges, being an effective journey person or skilled tradesman, these are seriously high cost endeavors now, and they're making it unaffordable for families. So the bold idea, I believe, is eliminating tuition fees. I believe in taking out user fees off. That's my personal opinion. That's what the Canadian Federation of Students has said. The Liberal government will say that what we have to do is provide free tuition asterisks, which is, their plan basically is a $6,000 grant to the poorest OSAP users. And they call it free tuition.
Right.
But they've tripled tuition fees since they've been in government for the last 5 years. They've tripled them. They've cut funding to institutions. They've cut funding to skilled trade training halls. And now they market this free, it's like a lot of things with liberal public policy. It's a lot of form and very little substance. And we're dealing with a student debt crisis. So I say, engage in a regime of fair taxation on Ontario's most wealthy citizens, which we have not done. Take the revenue from that and pay for quality public services like post-secondary education. Take the barriers off the front end of the system. And then, tax people fairly while they're earning, not while they're learning. But I'm not talking about big tax increases on low and middle income people. I'm talking about the wealthy in this province who've had a free ride under the Liberals, being asked to pay their fair share so we can make post-secondary education actually accessible. That's our bold idea for that sector.
And so if I'm a young Canadian and I'm a recent post-secondary grad who wasn't able to start the career that they wanted to, and then I'm stuck working 2-3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, what is the NDP going to do for me?
There's a few things we're going to do for you. You're going to see the details of it, but we're going to dramatically make post-secondary education more accessible. I believe in free education as the goal. We'll see what the party comes out from a platform perspective. But believe it, it's going to be ambitious. It's going to be gold. It's going to take the costs of education down dramatically. So that's what we are going to be doing for young people. But to bridge into another topic, when we think about what we can do for young folks, I'm thinking about how we're going to build energy in this province, right? And the untapped resource we're sitting on top of, because we've been so addicted to nuclear power in this province and big hydroelectric projects, we have not built renewable energy at all seriously in this province. The government has marketed the Green Energy Act, which is basically individual feed-in tariffs. So if you're a company and you want to put some solar panels up on the roof, or you're an individual and you want to feed that back in the grid, that was their solution. And it was not ambitious enough. And they've actually wrapped up a lot of those contracts that weren't working. And there were gas plants that gained them and made hundreds of millions of dollars out of it. So our view is take hydro back into public ownership, dramatically reduce people's bills. And then my own view as an environmentalist, I say use those economies of scale to build renewable energy. Right here in Ottawa Centre, we have a cooperative called the Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative. And that cooperative has 7,000 members. They have 17 projects under management and $7 million of capital raised collectively from people. And I've met with them and I've said, are you aware of what they do in Germany? Are you aware of what they do in the Netherlands and even places like China, where they take public utilities and they grow renewable energy? They put solar panels on hospitals, schools, churches. I mean, we are just dipping our toe in the water here in Ontario, and we got people leading in places like Ottawa, and they could be leading 1,000 times stronger with a public utility. And what the Liberals have done is they've sold a third of the grid to private interests. They've made it harder to grow renewable energy. We're going to take hydro back into public ownership. We're going to grow renewable energy, and that is going to create thousands of local jobs for young people. Jobs people can believe in.
How exactly can the party take back hydro and bring it back under public ownership?
Well, we've got a plan. It's a 7-year plan. We're going to bring hydro gradually back into public ownership. And you can read all about it. Essentially, the idea is we will recapitalize and we will buy back the privatized entity. And that'll involve, buying out the existing private entities that the Liberals have, through greased palms, sold it off to. Right? So that's part of it. But I personally believe this isn't just about reducing rates for consumers and controlling the grid again. That's important. It's about using those economies of scale to grow renewable energy. That's what Germany does. That's what Norway does. That's what the Netherlands. That's what China does. And Canada could be a renewable energy leader that would create, for the energy workers in Northern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, who have been left behind by this government, who are looking at the paradigm around the world start to change, worried about their future. This is their future. It's not just for young people. Like, we have to think about putting Ontario's manufacturing base to work again, but building energy that will be sustainable.
Right.
And I think that just takes leadership, it takes vision, and that's what our party will bring.
And then to wrap it up with bold ideas, let's go hypothetical here. Let's say the election happens and say you get the majority mandate.
Yep.
What are your top 3 priorities for the next term?
Well, I mean, the lens through which I see everything is as someone who comes from a family of recent immigrants. My grandmother, she was born in Lebanon. On my other side of the family, we haven't been there that long. And the people who were here originally, the indigenous peoples of this land, the Algonquin peoples of this land, like, we have debts that we owe in reconciliation that we have to pay back. So my first priority is reconnecting the government of Ontario's treaty commitments to Indigenous peoples that live here. And for here, that's the Algonquin people. That's my first priority. It overrides everything else. It's the lens by which I see things. And then I care about the planet. I care about the environment, because we don't have anything else if we don't have a livable city and a livable future. So I will be a voice in an NDP government to make sure that it is going to be the greenest government this country has ever seen. And that doesn't mean pitting environmentalists against energy workers. It actually means bringing them together. And I think that is building renewable energy, building up the kind of skills that we have at our disposal. The cost of capitalizing renewable energy is cheaper now than it's ever been. And it doesn't have to only be led by the state. The state can provide grants. I mean, the state has been subsidizing fossil fuels since as long as the Canadian states existed, right?
Right.
We have an opportunity now to change that narrative and to subsidize cooperative growth in renewable energy. And that is a second commitment for me. And then a third commitment for me, because we're dealing with the Attorney General here in the province of Ontario, we have to do something about the justice system in this province. And that means not warehousing marginalized and poor people and building a bigger jail here in the city of Ottawa, which is what the Attorney General has committed to do. We need to actually make sure that people who are incarcerated because they're drug addicts, because their neighborhoods are over-policed relative to mine, have to deal with that problem.
Right.
People have to have decent jobs. People have to have harm reduction. They have to have strategies to improve themselves. It costs us more as a society to warehouse people. Do you know, sorry, not to belabor the point, but the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre on Innes Road, the existing facility, which has earned terrible reviews for safety for correctional workers, for safety and human rights for inmates. 68% of the people that are there, Matt, are there on remand. And what that means is that they haven't been charged yet. They're waiting for trial. They can't afford bail. Who are they? They're disproportionately black, brown, indigenous. This is, you want to see how our society marginalizes people? Go to a jail. Go to a homeless shelter. Go to a food bank, right? And so my third priority I would articulate to you is we need a justice system that actually works for people and doesn't continue to oppress and marginalize people. So Indigenous reconciliation, environmental justice, and actually having a functioning justice system. And I have many more priorities, but you asked for 3, they're there.
Absolutely. Joel, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.